The moment he walked through that door with her, I already knew. Not in the way you suddenly realize something you had been ignoring. I mean, I had known for 3 weeks. I had the paper. I had the name. I had sat alone in my car, in the parking lot of a Walgreens, and read a renter's insurance notice 3 times. Until the words stopped looking like words and started looking like the shape of everything I had been trying not to believe. But standing there at my own baby shower, 7 months pregnant in a dress I had bought specifically because the color made me feel like myself again, watching my husband guide a woman in a burgundy wrap dress through the front door of a venue I had reserved 4 months ago. Something else happened. Something quieter than rage and colder than heartbreak. I decided I was going to let him finish his sentence. He walked her straight to me. He had the audacity, the sheer breathtaking audacity, to put his hand on the small of my back and say, "Babe, I want you to meet Vanessa. She's been so supportive through everything. She's like family." Vanessa smiled. She said, "Oh my gosh, look at you, you are glowing." And I smiled back. I said, "Thank you so much for coming. My name is Claire." I was 29 years old, a third-grade teacher at an elementary school in Dallas, Texas, and I was standing in a room full of people who loved me, holding a secret that was about to change every single thing about my life. I had been with my husband Daniel for 6 years. We got married when I was 26. For the first 2 years, I would have told anyone who asked that I had married my best friend. Daniel was funny in the way that made strangers like him within 5 minutes. He was thoughtful when it mattered. When we found out I was pregnant, he cried. Actually cried. We were in the bathroom of our apartment, and he held the test, and his eyes went red. And he pulled me in and held me for a long time without saying anything. He spent a full Saturday in February painting the nursery. I sat in the hallway on a step stool because the fumes were too strong for me to be in the room, and I watched him roll pale yellow paint onto the walls with this focused, careful expression, the kind of expression he got when something mattered to him. He was building something. That is what I thought then. I thought we were both building something. I think about that Saturday a lot now. I wonder which month Vanessa's lease had already started by then. The insurance notice arrived on a Thursday afternoon in early October. It came in a standard white envelope addressed to Daniel, but our mailbox key is on the same ring as my car key, and I had gotten home first. I pulled it out without thinking and set it on the kitchen counter with the rest of the mail. I almost didn't open it. It was addressed to him. But the return address was from an insurance company we both used for our shared renters policy. And I assumed it was a renewal or a rate change notice, something that affected both of us. I opened it thinking it was something I needed to know about. It was a policy document. A separate policy. A different address. Not our apartment address. A unit on the other side of Dallas, about 14 miles from where we lived. The name of the primary policyholder was Daniel. The name of the second listed resident was Vanessa Caldwell. I read it twice. I set it down. I picked it up and read it again. Then I took a photo of it with my phone, folded it back exactly the way it had been, and put it at the very bottom of my bag underneath my wallet. I did not say anything that night. Daniel came home at 7:15. He brought takeout, my current craving, which he had been keeping track of without being asked, because that was the particular cruelty of Daniel. He still did the small, considerate things. He brought the right food. He asked about the baby's position at dinner. He rubbed my feet afterward. I went to bed at 9:30 and lay in the dark for a long time listening to him watch television in the other room, and I thought about how I was going to need to be very, very careful about what I did next. The next morning, I called in a personal day. I drove to the Walgreens parking lot because it was somewhere I could sit in my car without anyone expecting me to be anywhere. And I reread the insurance document on my phone. Then I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and just breathed for about 15 minutes. I want to be honest about what I felt in that parking lot. Because I think people imagine it as a dramatic collapse. It wasn't. What I felt was something closer to a very specific kind of tiredness, the kind that comes when you have been quietly suspicious for a while and have just been given the confirmation that your instincts were not wrong. My body had been telling me something was off for months. Little things. Nights when he came home later than usual, and the explanation was vague. A change in his phone habits, turning it face down on tables, carrying it into the bathroom when he showered. I had told myself I was imagining it. I had told myself that pregnancy made me anxious and insecure in unfair ways, that I was projecting. I had been very disciplined about believing the more generous story. The insurance notice made it impossible to be generous anymore. I called my cousin Renee from that parking lot. Renee is a paralegal, and she has a quality I have always relied on, which is that she does not panic. She also does not soften things out of kindness when softening them would waste time. She listened to everything I said without interrupting. Then she said, "Okay. First things first, do not touch the joint account and do not close it. Don't move anything yet. You need a record of everything exactly as it is." She told me to call the leasing office at the address on the insurance notice, Avot, and ask whether Daniel was listed on the lease, and whether there was a co-lessee. I said, "I can't believe I'm doing this." She said, "I know, do it anyway." I called the leasing office from my classroom on Monday during lunch. I told the agent I was following up on a renter's insurance document and needed to confirm the current occupants on file. She pulled up the account without hesitation. She confirmed Daniel was the leaseholder. She confirmed the co-resident listed was a Vanessa Caldwell. She told me the lease had started 9 months ago. 9 months ago, I had been in my first trimester. I had been throwing up every morning and calling Daniel from the school bathroom between classes because the nausea was so bad. I was starting to worry it was something other than normal pregnancy. He had answered every time. He had told me to drink ginger tea and said he would be home early. He had been on a lease with another woman while he answered those calls. I thanked the agent and hung up. I sat at my desk and ate half my sandwich and graded 7 math worksheets and did not cry until I got to my car at 3:45. Then I cried for about 9 minutes. Then I stopped and drove home and made dinner. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a picture. I printed out 3 months of joint bank statements and went through them, carefully, line by line, during the evenings when Daniel was in the other room, watching television. There were regular transfers, 200 here, 300 there, that he had labeled in our budgeting app as work expenses. I cross-referenced the dates. They were consistent, they were monthly. They had been happening for 9 months, which lined up exactly with the lease start date. I was not a forensic accountant. I was a 3rd-grade teacher. But I had been managing our household finances since early in our marriage, because Daniel had asked me to take it on, and I was good at it. The records were all in one place because I had put them there. The paper trail existed because I had built and maintained the systems that kept it organized. He had handed me the evidence by asking me to be the responsible one. I contacted a family law attorney named Sandra. I met her at her office during a prep period on a Wednesday afternoon with a folder of printed statements and the photo of the insurance notice on my phone. Sandra was direct in the way that good attorneys are, interested in the specific and factual rather than alarmed by the emotional. She told me what I could do, what I should document, what I should not do, and what the likely shape of proceedings would look like. She noted that I was due in 6 weeks and suggested we not rush into anything before I had a clearer picture of my circumstances after the birth. She also said, very clearly, that I should not move any money, not close any accounts, and not say anything to Daniel until I was ready. I left her office and drove to my prenatal appointment and listened to my daughter's heartbeat, which was strong and regular and completely unconcerned with any of this. Daniel noticed nothing over those 2 weeks, Or, if he noticed a shift in my manner, he attributed it to late pregnancy exhaustion, which was a convenient explanation I did nothing to correct. He was helpful in small ways. He made the coffee every morning. He carried the groceries. He reached things from high shelves without being asked. Part of me found this enraging, and part of me found it genuinely sad, and I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to sort out which feeling was more appropriate. 2 days before the shower, he mentioned casually that he'd invited a few coworkers because he wanted people from his side of things represented. I said that was fine. I assumed he meant Greg and maybe someone else from his office I'd met once at a work event. I did not think to ask specifically who. Mara texted me the morning of the shower at 8:30. Hey, random question. Daniel mentioned someone named Vanessa might come. Do I know her? I set my phone, face down, on the bathroom counter and finished doing my mascara. Then I picked it back up and typed, I'm not sure, I'll ask him. I didn't ask him. I went to the venue 2 hours early with my mom and helped arrange the centerpieces and set out the little cards for guests to write wishes for the baby. And I told myself I would deal with whatever happened when it happened. I had the notice folded in an envelope at the bottom of my bag. I had the leasing office confirmation. I had Sandra's phone number in my contacts. I had 3 weeks of preparation behind me. I was as ready as I was going to be. She arrived with him at 12:40. The shower had started at noon. He walked her in, like she had every right to be there. She was put together in the specific way that is designed not to stand out. Tasteful dress, small gold earrings, hair done, nothing ostentatious. She shook my mother's hand and called her Mrs. Holloway. My mother smiled and said how lovely it was to meet her. Daniel guided her across the room to me. He put his hand on the small of my back and made the introduction. She said I was glowing. And I thanked her for coming. And those were the words that existed on the surface of what happened next. My mother-in-law Patricia appeared beside me, about 5 minutes later, with the warm, confiding tone she uses when she's sharing something she considers good news. She told me Vanessa and Daniel were on the same project team. She said Vanessa was such a sweetheart. She pointed out the flower arrangement by the cake table, pale pink peonies in a white vase, professionally arranged. She said it was from Vanessa. I looked at the flowers. I thought about the monthly work expense charges in the bank statements on my kitchen table. I said, "That's so thoughtful of her." Patricia squeezed my arm. I smiled at her. The afternoon moved forward. Here is what the next hour looked like from the outside. A completely lovely baby shower. Laughter and games and a pile of gifts taller than my own head. My mother cried over the handmade quilt. Mara's toast made half the room laugh, and then made half the room cry. My aunt brought a casserole even though it was a shower brunch, because that is what my aunt does at every family gathering. Regardless of context, and the familiarity of it made me feel, for a moment, like the parts of my life that mattered were still intact. From where I was standing, it looked like something else entirely. I watched Daniel and Vanessa with the careful peripheral attention of someone who has had weeks to practice not appearing to watch. I noted the practiced quality of the way he didn't look at her, which is entirely different from simply not paying attention to someone in a room. I noticed her laugh once, from across the space, at something he said near the gift table, a reflex she smoothed over quickly. I noticed her pick up a tiny onesie and hold it for a moment before setting it down, and I watched her face while she did it. Then she made a mistake. She was near me, talking to Greg from Daniel's office, and he asked her something about the drive over, and she said it hadn't been bad at all. She was just over in Lakewood, so it was easy. Lakewood. That was the neighborhood on the insurance notice. I excused myself from the conversation I was in. I walked to my chair where my bag was hanging on the back, and I reached in and took out the folded envelope. I walked to where Daniel was standing near the gift table with my uncle. And I waited for a natural pause. And then I lightly touched Daniel's arm and said, Hey, can I steal you for just 1 second? He excused himself and turned to face me with his easy, practiced, social smile still in place. I unfolded the notice and held it at a low angle, just enough for him to see what it was. I watched his face go still, in a way I had never seen his face go still before. It was like watching the performance underneath, the performance finally drop. Everything he had been holding in place just stopped. I said quietly, just for him. I found this 3 weeks ago. I called the leasing office. I know the lease started 9 months ago. I know her name is on it. He opened his mouth. He closed it. I folded the paper back up and said, I'm not going to do this here. But I need you to know that I know. And I need you to know that every conversation we have from this point forward is going to happen with me already knowing the truth. Then, I turned around and walked back to my guests. Mara was beside me, within 6 steps, plate of fruit in hand, with the look of someone who had been tracking me from across the room and understood that something had happened without needing to be told what. She fell into step next to me and said the quilt was so beautiful and asked if I was going to call my grandmother tonight. I said, yes. We spent the rest of the afternoon opening gifts. Daniel was visibly off for the rest of the shower. The easy social fluency was gone, replaced with something tight and over-careful. He laughed a beat late. He refilled his water twice without drinking it. He did not come near me again. Near the end of the shower, Vanessa came to say goodbye. She found me by the cake table and said she'd had such a lovely time and wished me all the best. She said Daniel talked about me all the time, and that we were clearly a wonderful team. I looked at her for a moment and said thank you for coming. She smiled and left. My mother rode home with us and stayed for dinner. By the time she left at 8, Daniel and I were in the apartment doing the practiced quiet of two people who have decided, without saying it, that a conversation will keep until tomorrow. It kept for 2 more days. He tried the first evening, stepping toward me in the kitchen and saying my name in the tone that meant he wanted to begin, and I said, without turning around, not tonight. He tried again the following morning before work, and I said, I had to get ready. He texted me twice that day, once to check how I was feeling, and once, around 4 in the afternoon, with just, I'm sorry. I didn't respond to either one. On the third evening, he sat down at the kitchen table and started with, I need you to understand how this happened. I let him talk for 4 minutes. He said it had started before I was pregnant. He said it had ended. He started a sentence with Vanessa is just, and I put my hand up. I let the silence run for a moment. Then I said, I've retained a family law attorney. I'd like you to move your things to the Lakewood apartment this weekend. He stared at me. He said, You're 8 months pregnant. I said, I know exactly how pregnant I am. He said, We can figure this out. We can talk about this properly. I said, The lease started 9 months ago. You brought her to my baby shower and introduced her to my mother. I'm not interested in an explanation of how something that was going on for 9 months began. He didn't leave that night. Or that weekend. There were 4 more days of him cycling between apology and asking me to consider what I was doing to our family, and I stopped engaging. I called Renee every morning. I slept in our bed. Because it was my bed, and I was not going to be the one who moved to the couch. At 32 weeks pregnant, I ate well, and went to my prenatal appointments and answered my third graders' questions about the water cycle, and read to them every afternoon like nothing was different, because for them, nothing was. He moved out 11 days after the shower. He took clothes and his laptop and a few boxes of clearly personal items. He left the furniture. He stood in the doorway of the nursery for about a minute on his way out, not saying anything, just looking at the yellow walls, and then he left. The next 4 weeks were the strangest of my life. I was alone in our apartment with a nursery I had finished with Mara on a Saturday afternoon because I refused to wait. My mother offered to move in, and I said, not yet. I needed to know I could manage this part. She came every few days with food, and without too many questions, which was the most useful thing anyone could have done. Sandra sent documents to Daniel's attorney. He responded promptly, which I later understood was because he had been advised that promptness would work in his favor at mediation. There were preliminary discussions about the joint account and shared assets. I understood each document before I signed anything because I had Renee to walk me through it. At some point in those weeks, Patricia called me. She said she hadn't known, in the careful tone of someone who had been advised to be careful. I said I believed her. I'm not entirely sure I did, but it also didn't change anything. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in November. 6 pounds, 14 ounces, she had Daniel's. She had Daniel's nose and my stubbornness, which my mother identified immediately and considered an excellent arrangement. Mara was in the delivery room. My mother was in the delivery room. Daniel was in the waiting area, because that was what I had put in my birth plan and told my medical team before I went into labor, and they honored it without question. He came in afterward for about 20 minutes. He held her. He cried again, the same way he had cried in the bathroom over the pregnancy test, eyes going red, not saying anything. I watched him hold his daughter, and I understood something I hadn't been able to fully put into words until that moment. A person can love their child completely and still betray the person standing next to them. Those two things do not cancel each other out. They both exist, and you have to decide what to do with that. He handed her back to me. He said her name quietly. He left. Mediation ran 3 months. What damaged Daniel's position most significantly was the documentation trail. The 9-month-old lease, the monthly transfers, the insurance notice, and a credit card transfer of $1,500 he had made from our joint account 4 weeks after the shower to a card he had opened in his own name only. My attorney flagged it. The mediator noted it. The account was formally frozen at that point. His attorney tried once to characterize the Lakewood apartment as a work arrangement. My attorney put the leasing office confirmation and the insurance document on the table and left them there. The mediator moved on. He lost credibility in that room without me having to fight hard for it. The evidence spoke in a flat, document-level voice that was more effective than anything emotional could have been. The credit card transfer was repaid. The joint account was divided. The settlement accounted for my income disruption during the final months of pregnancy and the immediate postpartum period. It wasn't everything I had built toward. Settlements never are. But it was fair in the legal sense, and I had made my peace with understanding that legal fair and emotional fair are not the same thing. I went back to my classroom in February. My daughter came with me to school drop-in care for the first 2 weeks while I got my footing. My third graders made her a paper crown that said, "Baby Teacher" in crooked or marker letters, because they couldn't agree on her actual name. That crown is on my refrigerator. Co-parenting is the cleanest sentence I can write about what Daniel and I do now. He shows up on the scheduled days. He doesn't ask for forgiveness out loud, which I appreciate more than I expected to. We have a shared calendar, a drop-off protocol, and a group text whose subject line is only her name. That is the shape of what remains. What I think about on the mornings I get up early to feed her, watching the Dallas sky go from dark to gray to pale gold through the kitchen window, is the moment Vanessa mentioned she was just over in Lakewood. The small, unguarded slip. She had no idea I was carrying that insurance notice in my bag 3 feet away. She was just answering a question about traffic. He thought pregnancy made me dependent in the useful kind of way, too overwhelmed to notice, too fragile to act. He had badly miscalculated. My entire job was paying close attention to what people said and didn't say. Keeping a room together while managing things beneath the surface, noticing the detail that told you something important was happening. I had been doing that work for years. He had watched me do it. He still believed I wouldn't notice. The nursery still has the yellow paint. I didn't change it. It is a good color, and my daughter seems to find it calming, And I decided that the Saturday in February, when Daniel stood there with a roller brush and looked like he was building something real, that day belongs to me, more than it belongs to anything that came after. I'm keeping it. There are days when this story feels very far away, and days when it feels like it happened last week. I don't think that changes on a schedule. What I know is that I didn't fall apart. I didn't make a scene at my own baby shower. I didn't let the grief become something that burned down what I still needed intact. I held it together long enough to handle it right. I paid attention when it mattered. I showed up for the person in my life who needed me most, and she was 6 pounds, 14 ounces. And she was counting on me before she even knew what counting on someone meant. That is enough. That is more than enough. If you have ever had to hold yourself completely together in a room full of people while carrying something that was slowly breaking your heart, you know this feeling. You know the specific, quiet strength it takes to wait. To be sure. To move from a place of knowledge instead of panic. Drop a comment and tell me. Would you have confronted him right there at the shower? Or would you have waited for the private moment? Would the public scene have felt like justice? Or would the private confrontation have felt like power? I genuinely want to know. And if this kind of story stays with you, stories about women who didn't fall apart, who held the truth carefully until the right moment, subscribe to Best Drama Stories. There are more. There will always be more. Hit like if you made it this far, and I will see you in the next one. There is one more thing I want to tell you. Because I think it matters. In the weeks between Daniel moving out and our daughter being born, I had a conversation with my school principal, a woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had known me since I was a student teacher. I didn't tell her the full story, just enough to explain why I might need additional flexibility in the spring. I told her I was going through a separation and that things were complicated. She looked at me across her desk for a moment and then she said, "Claire, you have been one of the most dependable people in this building for 3 years. Whatever you need, we will figure it out." I cried in her office. Not the 9-minute car cry, not the controlled bathroom cry. I actually cried. She handed me tissues and didn't say anything about it, which was the right thing to do. I tell you this because I think it is easy, when you hear a story like mine, to focus on the confrontation at the shower, on the insurance notice, on the mediation, on the moment, the flat documentary evidence sat on a table and did its quiet, devastating work. Those are the moments that make a story feel like something with a shape and a resolution. But the part that held everything together was none of that. It was a personal day spent in a Walgreens parking lot. It was Renee answering her phone and saying, "I know. Do it anyway." It was Sandra in her office being interested instead of alarmed. It was my mother coming over every few days with food and not asking too many questions. It was Mara falling in step beside me, at the shower, with a plate of fruit. It was Mrs. Okafor handing me tissues. It was my third graders making a paper crown for a baby they hadn't met yet. The structures that held me up were not legal documents, though the legal documents mattered. They were people. Specific people who showed up in the specific ways they were capable of showing up, and who didn't require me to be okay before they helped me. I think about Vanessa sometimes too, and I want to be honest about that. I do not think about her with the energy of fury. I think about her the way you think about a detail, in a story that explains something you couldn't explain before. She was not the cause of anything. The cause was a choice that Daniel made, before she ever walked into the picture, and probably before I did too. What she was, in the end, was a name on a document that he forgot was still going to our shared mailbox. A small, careless oversight in an otherwise very careful arrangement. He had planned almost everything. He had managed almost every detail. He had even managed his own expression in a room full of people for 6 years. The one thing he had not managed was a standard renter's insurance notice, routed automatically to the billing address on file, which happened to be the apartment we shared, because That was the address he had given the insurance company before we moved in together and before Vanessa was ever in the picture. And he had simply never updated it. That is how these things end, usually. Not with a dramatic reveal. Not with a confrontation in a parking lot or a speech in a courtroom. With something small and administrative and almost accidental. A piece of mail. A neighborhood mentioned in passing. The particular, ordinary failure of someone who was running too many things at once and stopped being careful about one of them. I am not grateful it happened. I want to be clear about that. I am not grateful for the shock of that Thursday afternoon, or for the weeks of sleeping next to someone while carrying the weight of what I knew, or for giving birth with my husband in the waiting area because I could not trust him in the room. I am not grateful for any of the cost, but I am clear about what I know, now that I did not know before. I know what I am capable of carrying. I know how carefully I can move when I have to. I know that the same discipline that makes me a good teacher, the same attention that made me good at managing our finances, the same capacity to hold a room together and notice what is happening underneath the surface, that those are not just professional skills. They are mine, they live in me. And when it mattered, I used them. My daughter is almost 8 months old now. She has started pulling herself up on the edge of the couch and looking very pleased with herself about it. She laughs at the dog that lives next door when it barks, which is somehow exactly the kind of laugh I hoped she would have. She has my stubbornness and, it turns out, Daniel's laugh, which is the warm kind that comes without warning, and which I have decided I'm allowed to appreciate even now. She does not know any of this yet, she won't, for a long time. When she is old enough to ask, I will tell her the truth in whatever way is right for her age, and for what she needs. I will not make her choose sides. I will not use her as an instrument of anything. I will tell her that the people who love us sometimes hurt us badly, and that being hurt does not make you weak, and that paying attention is always worth it, even when what you notice changes everything. She will have both of her parents. She will have Mara, who is already her godmother, and has opinions about her outfits that are frankly very strong. She will have my mother, who cried over the quilt. She will have my aunt, who will bring casseroles to every significant occasion of her life, regardless of whether casseroles are appropriate. She will have a nursery with yellow walls. She will have me, wide awake, at 6 a.m, watching the Dallas sky go pale gold through the kitchen window. That is what I get to keep. That is the part no document, no betrayal, no carefully managed situation could touch. That is everything.